weeks ago, we had a more in-depth discussion on the Open Health Stack components, primarily discussing the different Android Fire SDK libraries. So if you can remember, we tackled the structured data capture library, the Fire Engine, the Knowledge Manager, and the Workflow library. And today we will be having a more technical discussion as we discover how to set up Open Health Stack components and relevant tools to empower your ability to create the next generation of healthcare applications. So, before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that this webinar session will not be possible without the support brought by the Strengthening Standards Capability Project, or the SSCP, of CSIRO Australia, the National Science Agency, and the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or the DFAT. So we will be foregoing the usual icebreaker or the Menti. And now let me introduce our speaker for the third session of IOL 101. So Mr. Jing Tang, the software engineer lead at Google Health, is driven by a passion for using technology and improving health equity. So his background is in computer science and AI. So he has projects spanning from robotics to theorem proving to modeling and temporal logic. So at Google, he has worked in ads and mobile development. And since 2020, his focus has been an open health stack and the Android Fire SDK, or as we all know, the software development kits at Google Health. So, which his work aims to make healthcare more accessible and equitable for all. So beyond this technical work, a fun fact, Sir Jing Tang is actually an activist. So he supports multiple charities, which are mainly focused in healthcare, but also other than that, there are also other international development charities that he's been really passionate about. So now to teach us how to set up open health stack components and other relevant tools in creating next-gen healthcare apps. So we have with us, virtually, let us welcome Sir Jing Tang. So Sir Jing, I'll stop
Thank you,
sharing my
Gabby, for the
screen.
introduction. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. For those of you in Manila or in the Philippines, if you're elsewhere, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining. Again, my name is Jing, software engineer at Google Health. 2 weeks ago, I think we had this session to go through some of the components of Android Fire SDK in Open Health Stack. But prior to sort of the the boot camp that's going to happen next week, so we want to really help people set up some of the tools that we'll be using and go through some of the developer resources that we'll be using and that will be helping us throughout the week next week. So that's the main purpose of this session. So thank you very much for joining. It's going to be sort of hopefully a little bit more interactive. I have a lot of links, a lot of QR codes for people to follow along. So if you do have your laptop, well, I'm assuming you're dialing in from your laptop. So if you're able to, please try to follow along some of the content by going to the website, by scanning the QR code, by downloading the relevant tools. You won't be able to set up everything in this session. There's a lot of kind of tools for you to to sync and to build. So those I will leave to the sort of to you for after the session, but before the bootcamp next week. But yeah, but as long if you can, please try to follow as much as you can. I'm going to start to present my screen. All right, I hope you can see my screen. Can someone please just say yes if you can?
Yes, can see your screen.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, so the agenda today, we'll have a really quick recap of Open Health Stack and Android Fire SDK. I'll try to be quick and just spend a few minutes there. And then we'll take a quick look at the OHS dev site, where you'll find sort of most of our developer resources. And then we'll go through some sort of more hands-on topics. We'll set up HappyFire, the Fire server locally, which will be used next week. And then we'll set up the Android Fire SDK code labs locally. I'll show you how to do that. And then we will also show you how to download the sort of clone the Android Fire SDK code base and begin running the demo apps. So this is a bit more, a bit different from the code labs. The demo apps are directly using the sort of the local libraries that you're building. So it's very easy. It's a very good way for you to try to change things in the SDK and see how things will sort of behave in the applications using the SDK's APIs. And then we will sort of very briefly show you, sort of ask for registration information for the setup of the Quick Lab, which we have been using for sort of the tutorials for Fire data pipe. So that will happen next week as well. So a pre-registration collection, your account details will just make it a lot quicker and smoother next week. Right, so without further ado, let's get into the recap. So Open Health Stack is the suite of tools that we have built to help developers build generation health AI solutions. The components in OHS include the Android Fire SDK, which is the components in the bottom left of the diagram, and which is a set of Android libraries for you to build Android apps using Fire. The gateway, as another component of OHS, sits between the client and the Fire server. So here you don't have to have the SDK as a client in this case, right? You could have actually other Fire clients or applications talking to the server via the info gateway. So this gateway really acts as a reverse proxy to help you kind of separate the communication authorization from the Fire server. And then another component of OHS is the Fire data pipes, which will have hands-on sessions next week as well. So this is the tool for you to sort of in a horizontally scalable way create dashboards, indicators from the Fire data that you have in the servers. So this is the sort of components we have in OHS, but obviously, Happy Fire server is something that you may well use, and we recommend using next week as the sort of canonical storage for the Fire data. And then you will be building, applications, dashboards, and sort of analytics pipelines on top of the components we have. So I think I actually have talked maybe enough about the three components, so we'll just go over this really quickly. So the SDK, apart from the things that I've said, right, it also has the capability to sort of ingest the knowledge resources from Fire implementation guides. So this is what the knowledge manager is used for, and then you can use the workflow library to sort of execute some of the CQL logic and other sort of measurement and other sort of workflow logic in your application. The Fire Info Gateway, sort of I mentioned the main use case, but perhaps a couple of things to highlight also is it has a pluggable architecture. So if you go and look at the code, you'll see that each sort of functionality is actually registered as a plugin, which means you can actually very easily add more functionality to it in a way that is very scalable and very easy to manage. And plus, it also supports Smart on Fire schema for managing patient data. And then finally, the data pipes, as I said, it's a tool for you to build analytics pipelines and dashboards, but it also has similar support for different data warehouses, right? From traditional relational database to distributed query engines. So it's kind of very flexible as a tool. All right, and then the SDK, just to quickly recap as well, has 4 libraries: the SDC library, the Fire Engine library, the Workflow library, and Knowledge Manager library. There's quite a lot. I appreciate that. But actually, for the different libraries in the Android Fire SDK, you could pick and choose. It's possible for you to use an SDC library to build an app that just does SDC. It's possible for you to build an app using just the Fire Engine library, right? So for the Knowledge Manager and for the Workflow library, I think it makes a bit less sense for you to just use them standalone, because typically when you do things like a clinical workflow, you would need patient data. So quite typically you would want to use FireEngine as well. But sort of theoretically, all these 4 libraries independent, and you could pick and choose what you want to do. But putting them together, you are building an application with patient data stored on device and also being synced with the file server via the FireEngine library. But also you could have knowledge resources being managed on device by the knowledge manager library, also communicating with the knowledge repository. And then build on top of that, you would have workflows, you would have sort of data collection UI components, and of course you would have your application logic and business logic. Right. So that's a very quick recap to refresh everybody's memory. Now have a look at the developer resources we have available on the dev site. So the website, I'm hoping everybody is able to do this, but please do open a different tab and then go to ohs.dev. Right. So this is the developer site for Open Health Stack. I'm switching tabs. I hope it has been switched to the new tab. So pretty much everything that I'm showing you today, you would be able to find sort of links to from this website, right? So there's a lot of details. We have the sort of the mission, the tools, details of the components we have built, stories of implementers who have used our components, as well as some community information and links to the forum as well. But today, I want to just very quickly show you 3 things before we go to some hands-on sessions. So the first thing I want to show you is the developer documentation. So from the main site, right, if you navigate to the Learn tab, you see that on the left there's the Android Fire SDK documentation, the Info Gateway documentation, and the Fire Analytics documentation. So these 3 things are the sort of 3 GitHub hosted documentation sites we have built from the GitHub repos of the 3 things. So this is really where you will find a huge amount of information, README files, code samples, documentation, etc., etc. So if you have questions about any of the 3 components, I would say this is a place to really begin to dive into some of the details of this, the design and the implementation of these components. So in some of these documentations, there's also tutorials linked from it, right? Some of this I will be covering later on, but not everything. So especially if you're interested in the Info Gateway, for example, recommend you go through some of the tutorials in the Info Gateway session, right? Okay, so this is one thing. The second thing I want to highlight in the OHS site is the video tutorials. So again, in the Learn tab, if you click the video tutorial section, you will see there's a number of videos we have made, mostly last year, to go through the different OHS components in detail, together with the work with the code labs as well. So if you find it sort of easier to follow videos than to read walls of text online, I think this is a really good way for you to get started with some of the components. And then the last thing I want to highlight is the design guidelines. So this is something that we have created in the past with our UX researchers. Some of the data capture and offline and sync guidelines hopefully will provide you some sort of insight into what is the best way to build applications. What are some of the do's and don'ts? How to design the UX flow to make sure that your app is very intuitive and easy to use. Right. So let me come back to the slides. Right, so the next thing we're going to do is to explore a little bit the Android Fire SDK repository. So if you have the PDF file that can be included in the meeting invitation, You can follow along in that PDF file, by the way, and feel free to scan the QR code or simply just click through if you have that open, or you can just go to github.com/google/android-fire, and this is our repository. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time to talk about this, right? So obviously the source code is in the repo, but we also have documentation. We do have demo apps here. The code labs are also stored here, and more information as well. So in terms of the code, it's organized sort of, I think, in a very intuitive way. For example, the engine library is entirely separate as a Gradle module under the engine directory. The SDC library is in the data capture directory. The workflow library is in workflow directory, and the knowledge manager is in the knowledge directory. Let me see where that is. Oh, it's here. And then there's obviously a lot of Gradle files and everything else. But then another very, very useful directory for you to look at is the code labs directory. So within there, we have both the data capture code lab and the engine code lab. So this is something you will need next week. I'll go through that as well in a bit. And then in the demo directory, which is here, we have the demo application for the Fire Engine library. And in the catalog directory here, we have the catalog app for the SDC directory. So make sure you sort of reasonably familiar with the code base if you want to dive into some of these components. But obviously, if you just want to use the libraries without sort of making contributions or sort of really understanding how the API is implemented, the most important thing for you is probably the code labs. So make sure you're familiar with this directory. Right, coming back. So now I'm going to talk really quickly about the setup of HappyFire locally. So this is something that we will need next week. It will be used as a small local file server for you to run and to test against, right? So again, if you have your laptop, scan the QR code to follow the tiny URL to directly go to the second step of the Fire Engine code lab. So let me just click through to that. Right. So essentially, this second step of this collab, so by the way, it's just directly linked from the tinyurl, is the setup of the HappyFire server, right? So there's probably like five steps to it. So first of all, you need to install Docker. So if you don't have that, make sure to do that before the workshop next week. And then you can run this command, Docker command, to pull the Happy image, the Docker image. So this will take a little bit of time. Make sure you're on Wi-Fi when you do that. And then you can run the Docker image using this command, right? So this is the second step, sort of download and run the Docker image. And then the local file server will be started. So go and inspect the server by going to localhost 8080. So this is very standard. So that's the third step. And then after that, there's a couple of extra steps for you to set up some of the example data in the HappyFire server, because the image that you download is that wouldn't have any data in it. It's a clean image. So what you want to do, and here's what we recommend here, is to go to the Cynthia examples repo. I'm going to share this again. Switch to the Cynthia sample data. And then in this repo, you have a few different data sets, obviously. And then we recommend you to download one of them, the R4 data set from a few years ago, 2019. And then if you unzip that, you could then you will see sort of a lot of JSON files, actually, each of them being a file resource. And then coming back to your local environment, you could just use a curl sort of post command to post the content of those files to the file server you have set up on at port 8080. So basically copy and paste these commands, and then those sort of file resources will be uploaded to your local file server. So if that is successful, you can then try to navigate to the local file server to sort of search the resources you have uploaded, or directly go to one of the resources with ID in the HTTP request. Right. So this is the setup of the HappyFire server locally. If you haven't downloaded Docker, again, just to emphasize, if you haven't downloaded Docker, or if you haven't set this up, please do this before next week, because it really will make your experience next week a lot less frustrating and a lot quicker to maximize sort of the learning. All right, I might just pause actually a second to see if there's any questions here. I actually see a hand up. Is there a question I can address if you have any problems? Yeah, go ahead.
This is Sunny. Yeah. So I just like to ask, based on the setup that you requested us to do prior to next week, to start my video. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Just wanted to clarify whether it would be more convenient to either install this on directly on a Windows machine, on a Linux machine, or just a virtual machine within our own respective host devices.
Yeah, I think if you can, sort of having a local setup is probably the quickest, I would imagine.
Okay, so running it on the OS itself, not just a virtual machine.
No, but how? I mean, I'm not familiar with the development setup, so I probably wouldn't be the best to answer that. But the way I do it normally is I just set it up locally.
No,
I think that's probably...
maybe I didn't get my question correctly. Would it eat up a lot of resources, especially with Docker? Because with Windows, we have to install it on a Docker for Windows as against a local Docker installation for like Linux devices.
Well, in that case, I think you probably should just install the version for your operating system.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, so if you develop locally, like, just make sure that you download and install the correct version locally. But if you, well, it kind of depends on what you eventually are going to do. If you develop in a virtual machine, then you would want to have the setup in that same machine.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So imagine if you have Android Studio, for example, running on your Windows machine and everything, then obviously set up the HappyFire server together on the same machine. Cool. Any other questions about sort of the setup for Happy? I mean, this really is sort of, once you get going, should be really easy, because obviously it's a Docker image, so it should be really quick. But the time it will take is the download and the sort of running or starting of the server. So it will take a few minutes at least. So to make sure you do this. Right. So now, am I still sharing the? Wait, I don't think I'm sharing the right tab. Let me come back. So now let's take a look at the setup of the Android Virus Ticket Code Labs. We have two code labs, one for the Fire Engine library, and one for the SDC library, the Structured Data Capture library. So the Fire Engine library, code lab setup is, we talked about it first. Basically, again, follow the tiny URL. By the way, these links are also accessible from the OHS dev site. So if you go to ohs.dev and then go to learn, you see the CodeLab. Excuse me, the CodeLab links on the left. But also you can just follow the tiny URL or follow the QR code here. So when you open this link, what you will see is the setup of the Android app, right? So you would need to go and clone the Android Fire SDK repo or download the CodeLab directly. You could download it from GitHub using just download the zip file. But once you unzip it, you will need to find the CodeLab that's located in the CodeLab/engine directory, which I just showed you a few minutes ago. And then import the, so this is the important bit. People often ask questions here and because they have imported the whole repo instead of the CodeLab repo. But if you want to run the CodeLab, just go and import the CodeLab repo, which is CodeLab/engine. Once you open that directory, you just need to sort of sync the project and run the starter app. And the Android screen with a sort of basic sort of hello world landing page should show up in your emulator or the device of your choice, the testing device if you have one connected to your Android Studio. So this should take, this whole process will take, maybe 10-20 minutes for you to do. Just not because it is hard. Again, it just takes time because you will need to download the code, and then the syncing of the Gradle files sometimes will take a little bit of time. So make sure you have that ready before next week. I'm going to come back and just look at, just to see if there's any more questions. Okay, seems good. So the SDC CodeLab setup is very, very similar, right? Follow the link here, and it will take you to the SDC CodeLab setup. Basically, you just need to download the different sort of if you have downloaded the repo, just use the same repo. But when you open the project in Android Studio, make sure you open the CodeLab/data capture folder instead of the root folder of the entire repo. And then when you sync and when you run the app, you should again show the SDC CodeLabs landing page. And then, obviously we will be doing exercises to make this into a proper app. Cool. So these two things are probably the most important things if you want to follow along next week in the hands-on sessions for Android Fire SDK. Right. So after these, I want to talk a little bit about the demo apps we have. So just to differentiate a little bit, just to distinguish the difference between the demo apps and the CodeLabs, right? So the CodeLabs, they are the so those CodeLab apps are depending on published Android Fire SDK library targets, right? So the app themselves are very lean. They're very, they're kind of minimum setup. And then in the code, we have a few steps for you to begin sort of using the different APIs of Android Fire SDK. So if you want to learn how to use the API step by step, the CodeLabs are very, very good sort of examples. And it's probably closer to how you would be building apps for yourself as well, eventually. But the demo apps we have 4 demo apps. We have 3 demo apps in the Android Fire SDK repo. And they directly depend on the local module in Gradle, right? So what this means is that if you are changing the SDK, if you're changing the APIs, if you're changing the implementation of the APIs, and then you want to see how that sort of changes the behavior of the application, you can run the demo apps to see that. So this is more for people who are kind of touching the SDK implementation. If you want to dive deeper into the SDK, if you want to look at how the functionality is implemented and what's the impact of any sort of changes, or if you want to fix a bug, if you want to make a contribution, so the demo apps are very important for you to run. right? But this is separate from the code labs, which we probably will focus on initially, at least next week. Right, so we have 3 demo apps actually in the SDK repo, but there's something else I'll mention after that as well. So the first one is the Fire Engine demo app. This is the directory that I showed you. If you if you basically clone the repo, and then just run the Android target in the demo directory, the demo module of the Gradle project, that is the engine demo app, right? So there's a few screens in the demo app, but crucially, you can sort of test the CRUD operations of the engine. So you can create, update, delete, or read file resources from the engine database. You can then sync the local resources with the file server. You could also use the search API to pull up a patient list depending on the criteria in your application. Right. So these are the demo apps. Yep.
Yeah, Jing, regards the demo, can we run this without setting up the servers? Or do we need the server, or we can use this demo? Or is this identical with the other episode? This one?
Yeah. So so that's a good question. So the demo app actually, I think we go. So the demo app directly uses the test server of HappyFire. So there's HappyFire has a public test server. So so if you run the demo app, it goes directly to the test server, right? So you don't have to set up your local HappyFire instance for the demo app, right? So there's pros and cons of this, right? So the pros is that it's probably a little bit easier to set up on that, but obviously you don't have a dedicated sort of isolated environment. So if you are testing, for example, changing resources, you don't want to interfere. You don't want other people to interfere with your testing. So you do want to have a local Happy server for those purposes. But if you just run the demo app on its own, you will actually just go to the public Happy test server. So I think you were asking also the difference between the demo app and the code lab. So the code lab, again, it's a shell app for you to go through different steps to build a screen that uses the Android Fire SDK APIs, right? So there's 2 code labs, the engine code lab and the SCC code lab. But the demo apps, we have a few more of those. So those are, demonstrating all the APIs in the sort of in the different libraries. We have the engine demo app. So it's a bit confusing probably, but it's more comprehensive and is not used as a tutorial. It's not used as a kind of step-by-step like code lab, right? So if you want to kind of explore a bit more, look at the demo apps, but to begin with, use the code lab first.
Thank you.
I hope that helps. And I think to be honest, we have created quite a lot of resources for people to use and to look at, right? So I think it'll be a lot clearer once you start actually doing some of this. So again, really encouraging everybody to at least go through some of these setups this week, definitely before next week, because that really will change your experience. Cool. So back to this. This is the sort of the Fire Engine demo app, and then we have the SDC demo app. Very similarly, there is this page. There's some screenshots of the demo app. So again, this is different from the code lab. The code lab is you start from an empty screen, you go through different steps, and then you see how the questionnaire is rendered on the screen. But this demo app is really demoing all the different APIs in the SDC library. So you can already see there's sort of different widgets we have built. There are different layouts we have built, and actually there's a third screen in this app which showcases the different behaviors of the sort of more advanced behaviors of the questionnaire, such as calculated expression, initial expression, those like sort of complex behaviors in the questionnaires. So this is more comprehensive. If you want to look at how each of these things are sort of implemented and how they can be used, come to the demo app. But if you just want to sort of build your first app, go to the Code Lab. Right. We have a third demo app, which is sort of work in progress, actually. So it's the workflow demo app. So for this one, again, follow the link and just clone the repo and run the Gradle command for the workflow demo module in Gradle, and then you'll see this screen where you can sort of go through the different stages of a clinical workflow, from proposal to plan, and then to order, and then to the final event, which is performed. Right. So this is kind of a bit of a bonus content, actually. So we have another repo, which is called the Fire App Examples. In there, we have this particular app we have built using the SDK called the Configurable Care demo app. So this one is actually using the WHO's immunization implementation guide for you to go through the immunization workflow as a user. You would go through the registration of the patient. You go through the kind of the initial assessment of the eligibility of the patient for vaccinations, and then you go through sort of checks of contraindication. And when you come to administer the vaccine, you would then input data such as the batch number, and then eventually you conclude the administration of the vaccine by filling in the reporting data. So this is a kind of a more comprehensive example of using a particular implementation guide, and in this case, WHO's immunization implementation guide. We will talk about this next week, but sort of for now, I think this is a bit of a extra content. So focus on maybe some of the previous demo apps if you want to get your hands dirty trying some of this stuff. All right, so that's the demo apps we have and collabs we have in the SDK repo. Appreciate that there's quite a few of them, but as I say, start exploring a little bit, and I think once you've seen one or two of those demo apps, you probably will start to get your bearings around the repo and what is what. Yeah. So now I'm gonna pause for another second just to see if there's any questions. Cool. In that case, I'll continue. So now I'm going to switch gear and talk a bit about the FHIR data pipes quick lab setup. So this is something we will also go through next week. There's a quick lab session. It's actually very convenient, it works very well because you can really put the entire kind of the tutorial in the quick lab. So that's something that I have found to be saving a lot of time in workshops. So please do, but the thing is, to register for that code lab, you do have to be added to a list, right? So please do, if you can now, either scan the QR code or follow the tiny URL and provide your the email address that you want to use for the quick lab to gain access. So I will leave the screen, leave this QR code and the link on the screen for a few seconds. But obviously, this is included in the PDF file that Gabby sent out. So make sure you either register now or you register after this session, but before the workshop next week, to make sure that we don't have to do this at the beginning of the quick lab session. That would be a waste of time. Cool. I'll wait another 5 seconds before moving on. Right. So once you finish the registration, and I do think that we do have to add you to the access list. So I don't think the link here will work yet. But once you finish but once that is done, you will be granted access to the Quick Lab, and there will be like a whole sort of exercise for you to go through to use the FAIR data pipes and Apache superset to create dashboards from the FAIR data you have. Right. So this also goes hand in hand with the setup of the HappyFire server that we talked about earlier. All right. So actually, I think that's all the content I have today. Again, the main thing is for people to go through the content and click through the links and start downloading and setting up your environment. Any questions for now? I think I actually see 2 in the chat. So the first one I see from Rodo is from Christian, I think, is does the SDK support OAuth 2 client? So the SDK doesn't really touch upon the authorization part of things. So if you want to use OAuth 2 in your application, you can do that. But specifically the SDK itself, it doesn't touch the application, the sort of authentication workflow, because we recognize that that is kind of a separate thing, and apps might want to do different things. And also that's kind of a little bit further away from the sort of FAIR resources, the FAIR specifications. So we don't directly sort of support that, if you like, right? But then you're free to integrate that into your application using the SDK. That's totally fine. All right, we have another question from Rodo. The installation how-to doc is readily available for us, right? Yeah. So everything is linked from the PDF file that was sent out, and follow the links, follow the QR codes, and explore the website, the repo. But everything is linked. The how-to docs and the steps are linked from there as well. And I think Gabby was just posting the link for the registration. So thank you, Gabby. The recording will be shared. And then there is a question on the minimum hardware requirement for a laptop to run everything. It's a really good question, and I'm very sorry to say that I don't really have a hard requirement. But I would say that being able to run a server locally and being able to run Android Studio locally is something that is a minimum requirement for the exercises we want to do next week, right? Because we will be doing Android development, and Android Studio is not the most lightweight environment to run. So a reasonably powerful laptop is recommended, although we haven't really done a lot of testing to see like what is the minimum hardware requirements. So I would say please at least try to see if you can set it up. If you're not Android developer, it's the first time to set it up, it might take a bit of time, but please try to set up the Android environment and also the HappyFire server locally. Hopefully it'll be okay, but if not, you can also post on the forum, the details of which I will show in the next slide. And then we can maybe talk a little bit more about any sort of alternative arrangements. But there's some components you don't really need to set up locally, right? For example, the Quick Lab, as I said, it's entirely separate environment. It's very easy to use, and if you want to participate in that session, you don't really need to set up the Android environment because that's the analytics part of things. And HappyFire, if you really just want to sort of interact with the HappyFire instance instead of running it locally, there's a HappyFire test server as well. Like that's open to everyone. There's no authentication or authorization. You can just go and sort of start sending some API requests to the server and then see what it returns. So that's openly readily available for everybody as well. So for that, you don't need to set up your local environment. But if you want to do Android development, you do need to go through the requirements that we have said. Can we use laptop, non-Windows laptop such as MacBook? Yes, I use a MacBook, so that's totally fine. And SQLite DB, that's right. The Android Fire SDK uses SQLite DB as the as is the standard on Android. Yeah, I think it really depends on the implementation. So the DB part is what the Android Fire SDK uses for the local storage, right? So the Android device will have the DB storing all the patient data you want to store on device. But it also does sync with the backend file server, which could be a local server on-prem or cloud environment. That's entirely up to the implementation. And I think I have another question. Can we use Flutter aside from Android? We don't have support for Flutter, but we have been looking at, and actually we have just released a Kotlin Fire data model library this week. So if you go to github.com/google/kotlin-fire, you see the new repo. So we are definitely looking at sort of integrating with or migrating some of the Android Fire SDK functionalities to Kotlin multi-platform. So that's the kind of multi-platform solution that we are looking at. Mostly because we are already on Kotlin and we're doing Android development, so that's a very natural path. But using Flutter, we don't really feel like it is easy for us to create a separate stack in using Flutter, because obviously it has a different language requirement and is a very different kind of tech stack from what we have. But if you do want to use Flutter, there are excellent Flutter libraries out there in the Fire community. I think this one is called Firefly. Fly being FLI. Let me just find this actually. So that's a Flutter library. Yeah, I'm going to put it in the chat. That's a Flutter library, or actually a set of Flutter libraries that have been built for you to develop apps using Flutter. So if that's what you need, go and check out that repository. And no, we don't have Ionic support. No. Yeah, thank you for these questions and the. Oh, I saw that actually that was. Oh yeah, sorry. No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, thanks, Gabi, for posting that link. Oh yeah, sorry. I think I replied to you. Yeah, thanks for posting that to everyone. So yeah, I mean, as I say, Fire is a very active developer community. There are a lot of tools available on GitHub, open source. So please don't be afraid to explore the different repositories. I mean, we do have the set of tools we have built, right? But there's a lot more in the community, and I really encourage everybody to really go and engage and look at the wider community. And it's not just Open Health Stack. All right, I think that's the end of the questions, actually. Maybe there's more questions, but I will hand it back to you, Gabi. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Jing, for that, and thank you guys for the questions. So thank you as well for answering the questions already. We still have we still have time to answer one more question from the group. Do you have any other questions from the group? Okay, if not, I believe that's it. For now, may I invite everyone to please turn on your camera. Let's have a group photo taken before we end this session. So let's take a group photo in 3, 2, 1. Smile.